Well, hello everybody. The other day I did a video on how there's finally a difference between the two parties, and I made that video as the news was breaking, and I couldn't quite make out from the statements that people were making what the hell was going on, but it looked like Labor was saying they're willing to send Australian troops to Europe to be peacekeepers, which they're not going to be peacekeepers. They're going to be fighting for Ukraine. And the Liberals wouldn't. I saw a news article saying that both parties had jointly agreed not to do that by the end of the day, so I thought that the whole thing was a non-story. A week later, it turns out it's a massive story. So today's video I wanted to do on how Labor has become a pro-war party, but in doing that research and looking over the last 100 years of Australia's history, of Labor's history, I worked out that they're not a pro-war, an anti-war party, that they've never been an anti-war party, and every time an anti-war party has arisen in the Labor Party of Australia has worked to get rid of those people, which is obviously where we are again, because quite frankly, the Labor Party is as pro-war as the Republican Party or the Democrats in the United States. So I just want to go. I want to talk about how that is happening and how what's happening in our politics is very scary, and I'm very curious as how we get to a point where we've got a Labor government who's about to send our troops to Europe to fight against the Russians, and we don't get a say as the public. It's just, oh, we're just going to do that, and there's nothing in the media. The media are all pro this thing, so the public don't get a say. So rather than talking about that, I want to talk about how Labor are just a pack of warmongers. I'll start with a statement from the Prime Minister on the 22nd of April 2024. This is from the Prime Minister of Australia. Labor has just landed the single largest defence export agreement in Australian history. The deal means jobs and economic opportunity for Queensland. It talks about how they're going to make 100 Boxer heavy weapon carrier, only 100 vehicles. So this weapons manufacturing that they go on about is always just limited. What happens if no one wants any more after that 100? I guess people lose their jobs. People who open small businesses around this place to service this place, after the 100 are made, if things change, then all those people who got told they've got jobs for life, they've no longer got them for life. This whole concept of our economic prosperity revolves around making weapons for war is ridiculous. It means that we have to have wars in order to have economic prosperity. The landmark agreement initiated. Oh yeah, these are for Rheinmetall Defence, Australia's military vehicles centre of excellence at Redbank. That's a German company. I don't know what they mean about Australian manufacturing. We're doing excess manufacturing that they can't do in Germany. Now, I've highlighted this bit. Growing Australia's defence industry is a key priority of the government, and this strategy, it has measurable economic benefits. Just last week, the Australian Bureau of Statistics showed that 100,000 jobs nationwide, now they're very massaged figures, are supported directly and indirectly. Now, that includes things like when I was a truck driver, I used to drive trucks and drop off parcels to buildings in Melbourne that were run by the Department of Defence. Does that mean that I've got a job in the defence industry? Because they're counting that as a job in the industry. The expanding footprint of local defence manufacturing is about more than seizing economic opportunity for Queenslanders and the rest of the country. We want Australians to be safe at home and secure in the world, but China sends 3 warships down and we can't even fly a plane over the top of them to see what they're doing because all our military equipment is overseas. This is from the National Defence Strategy. Labor's in government, so that's their strategy. Underpinning the National Defence Security is general investment in the idea. This is the budget for the strategy. Since the release of the Defence Strategy Review last year, the Albanese government is investing. This is the media release, by the way. It's not the actual thing. Since the in addition, 5.7 billion over the next 4 years and 53 billion over the next decade in defence funding. This is all Labor's policy, by the way, above previous trajectory over the period. These additional investments include 11.1 billion over the next decade to deliver the government's response to independent analysis of the Navy's surface combat fleet. So are they actually buying anything or are they just spending $11 billion on reports? $1 billion over the next 4 years because the media never asked that question, by the way, over the next 4 years to accelerate ADF preparedness, including for long-range strike targeting and autonomous systems. $38.2 billion over the next decade to fund and rebuild IIP and accelerate and sustain priority capabilities. So the reason I'm reading those numbers out is I just want to remind you that we have over 1 million people in this country in poverty. No one's going to invade us. Do we really need to be spending this money? But Labor thinks we do. I've outlined this in this thing, so it must be important. Australia's alliance with the United States remains fundamental to our national security. The Albanese government is committed to deepening and expanding our defence cooperation with the United States and working together with the United Kingdom under AUKUS. Now, all through this thing, they keep on talking about something called the Indo-Pacific. I'd ask everybody to get out an atlas and look at the Indian Ocean and look at the Pacific Ocean and ask yourself, does Australia really need a sphere of influence that's 2/3 of the world? Like, we're basically saying that we deserve to have control over all of Africa, all of Asia, all of the South Pacific, all of the North Pacific, all of Latin America, and all of North America. And the alliance that we're a member of, we control all of that. That sounds a lot like world domination to me. Now, this is the really important thing I want to point out. Deputy PM Miles slams Dutton for politicising Ukraine under Albanese troops pledge. Peter Dutton has been accused of politicising. Now, this is from a newspaper, but the thing I want to show is that there really is a difference between these two parties, and it's a massive difference. And the weird position that Labor, the so-called anti-war party, is propagating in this like we're only a couple of weeks from an election. I really suspect that Albanese is going to approve troops to go to Ukraine before the election, before he goes to see the governor, so that this is done before the next parliament's in place. And we don't get a say. It's horrible and vile. The people of Australia have a right to say whether the troops of Australia go overseas for a stupid war led by Starmer, who's the Prime Minister of Britain. If there's ever been an argument for getting rid of our connections with Britain, it's Albo's being such a cuck to MI5 that he's willing to let the youth of this country shed its blood in another country overseas. And I'm not going to apologise for being angry about that. I've been anti-war since I went to primary school, and the communist teachers that ran our primary school taught me to be anti-war. I'm not going to apologise to it for anybody. So Peter Dutton has been accused of politicising support for Ukraine after he slammed a pledge by the PM to potentially put Aussie boots on the ground. Deputy Prime Minister Richard Miles has slammed Peter Dutton for politicising plans for potentially send Australian peacekeepers to Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire. The opposition leader accused Prime Minister Anthony Albanese of shooting from the hip following the pledge to British Prime Minister Keir Starmer late last week. He urged the PM to make informed judgments on what is in the country's best interest, and described the prospect of Aussie boots on the ground as unbelievable. Asked about the swipe, Mr. Miles said support for Ukraine enjoyed bipartisan support. So these aren't peacekeepers. This is support for Ukraine. This isn't like independent, don't have a view on the conflict peacekeepers. We're sending boots on the ground in support of Ukraine, who are fighting Russia. Therefore, we must be going overseas to fight Russia. Like, we don't get a say. Like, an election is about to happen in this country, and this isn't the biggest issue of this election. Do we go to war or not? Like, this is all going to happen. We're not going to get a say in it, and Albo's going to approve all this, and the next day he's going to go see the Governor General, and we're going to be in caretaker government, so nobody's going to be able to stop this. Like, we don't have an anti-war movement in Australia anyway. The Australian government conned us out of having an anti-war movement when the anti-war movement became a pro-Western ideology movement, and as long as we're fighting a war to support Western ideology, that's okay. Any war that doesn't support Western anti-ideology, all of a sudden we have an anti-war movement. But if we got a war that supports it, then yeah. So I have no idea how that happened over time. The opposition leader accused Prime Minister Albanese, I've just read all that. What has surprised me is that Peter Dutton has sought to politicise this in a way which really beggars belief. All we are saying we'll do is give due consideration to the kind of request for that support which we fought. Well, it's gotten further than that now. Now you've pretty much said it's your policy. So that's our choice. Like, yeah, it's ridiculous. I don't know how we got here, but that's where we are. Labor's now the pro-war party. Liberals the pro-war party. I don't actually really believe that Peter Dutton will not put boots on the ground when told to by his masters, and his masters that don't run this country, they run other countries. But they're Albo's masters too. Both of these people have the same masters, like big mining, big business, big money, and yeah. Um, but in the other thing about reading the um, oh, I haven't gotten into that bit yet, so I'll jump into that. Right, this is the ALP National Platform. Labor will this is what I mean by Labor's become the war party. Labor will ensure our defence forces, security agencies, police and emergency services are always appropriately resourced and given the necessary powers to respond to defend Australia's sovereignty. Why do police need powers to defend Australian sovereignty? Like police are state. Um, Labor will always work responsibly and constructively to improve our national security laws and to ensure our security agencies and police can employ the powers they already have and can acquire such additional powers they may need. This is from their National Conference policy. In regards to armed conflict, the conference resolves that the Albanese Labor government will refer to the issue of how Australia makes decisions to send service personnel into international armed conflict to an inquiry to be conducted by the Joint Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade. This inquiry will take submissions, hold public hearings and produce its findings during the term of the 47th Parliament. Now I ask you, we have Albanese in the last weeks of his Parliament telling us he's about to send troops to Europe. Boots on the ground in Ukraine, that's been his stuff, isn't it? Has any of that stuff happened? Because that's Labor Party's policy. And Labor Party's policy in referring to the conference notes that under international law, the South China Sea with a size of 3.5 million kilometres belongs to no one country. It's called the South China Sea for a reason. This important area of marine navigational, environmental and cultural significance borders China, Taiwan, Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia and Brunei. We call for the South China Sea to be a zone of peace with complete freedom of navigation for all countries. We call on all countries in the region to refrain from unilateral acts, militarisation and other policies. Now that's Labor's policy there. They're telling all the other countries, you shouldn't have warships up in the South China Sea. I ask you why we couldn't send warships out to say hello to the Chinese warships when they turn up just outside Australian waters? And the answer to that is all our warships are up in the South China Sea, militarising the South China Sea. So Labor's policy under the Labor Party conference is to not militarise the South China Sea. Labor in practice is sending all of our self-defence assets up into the South China Sea, turning them from self-defence assets into the tips of America's war assets. And that's what we're doing up in the North China Sea. We're being the tip of America's spear so that they don't have to be the tip of America's spear. Do you think if there's an accident up there and one of our naval ships bumps into one of those Chinese warships that America's going to come to our defence, regardless of who the president is? America's not going to war with China to save Australia. We should stop being their cucks, and the Labor Party policy should be we should stop being America's cucks. In wonderful times like Gough Whitlam, that was one of his policies. That's about me for today. That's quite long. I really have to start writing scripts for these things. Just remember, if you're entitled to redress, go see lawyers. You'll probably win a civil law case. Everybody have a good, safe day, and goodbye.